Institutes of the Christian Religion continued, chapter 12, looking at the only three sections in this chapter. He entitles it God Distinguished from Idols, that he may be the exclusive object of worship. So he's continuing on this idol train, refuting those things that either elevate images or, in this particular way, idolatry in worship. And he says, in terms of God being known, so from the beginning point of his argument, he's talking about how the knowledge of God has been transmitted, right? Through the creation, the natural order, man made in God's image can discern these things, and then through special revelation, that is Scripture. It's like this knowledge of God is not simply to bring about frigid, cold and immovable speculation. It's to bring about worship of the triune God, and it therefore carries along with it rules in terms of the manner of those things which belong to God in a peculiar way alone, and what should constitute his worship. He says even the pagans have rules about worship, so it doesn't fall into sort of superstition and absurdity, so that God might not be worshipped in a weird way, we might say, in our own day and age. And he says essentially superstition is little more than the accumulation of vanities with regard to God in terms of worship. And we see superstition all the time nowadays in somebody's, in a place, in an object somebody carries, in a sense, in a feeling, in a nature walk, whatever it might be. One of the things Calvin highlights here is that God is a jealous God. That is, he knows his own nature. He is holy, holy, holy. He is alone glorious and majestic. And so what does an idol do? It robs God of his honor, and it violates the true nature and purpose of worship. And in essence, the more idols you have to represent the characteristics of the one God, he relates it to as a dissecting of the Godhead among the multitude of gods, which is a way to rob God of his honor and to corrupt true worship. He then jumps in again to the word gymnastics of the Greek, this distinction between doulia, that is to serve, or what is often in the noun form a slave, and latria, worship, saying that this distinction was first made between service and worship so that it was permitted divine honors to be paid to angels and dead men. He makes a lot of good points in this section. So you're saying, look, the latria in the Greek is worship in the Latin, and you guys are cutting your baloney pretty thin here in terms of trying to make these distinctions, so you're permitted to honor angels and dead men and saints and whatever else might be. But he says it's really unquestionable, even if we think about it practically, that doulia, it unquestionably means service, and latria unquestionably means worship. However, if we get practical about it, in terms of a master or a civil magistrate or an employer, we could say in our own day and age, it's easier to genuflect and just pay a moment of honor, worship, than it is to actually serve them day in and day out. And that, in one sense, he says we could elevate and say doulia is a higher form of worship because it's a commitment of the life, of your blood, of your sweat, of your tears, of your labor. And in the next section, we see it's written that thou shalt worship the Lord thy God, and him only shalt thou serve, Matthew 4:10. He's quoting there. He quotes a number of other New Testament passages as well to essentially illustrate what? That even unknowingly, if a person genuflects, prostrates himself, bows, it's still condemned because that act in its nature is peculiar and reserved to God alone as a mark of worship and obedience. We see it in John, in Revelation. He's in terror and awe before the angel, and he prostrates himself. And the angel says, no. That's for God alone. I don't want to get in trouble. You don't want to get in trouble. Get up. You see the same with Cornelius. He bows, he prostrates himself to Peter, and Peter corrects him. He forbids him from doing that. So whatever offices of piety are bestowed anywhere else than on God alone are sacrilegious. are idolatrous or a misuse of images. And that's, again, just Calvin grinding away at this argument in favor, which was in the church of the day even, of images in worship and of idolatry in worship with those arguments he presented and deconstructed. All right, thanks for listening. I hope that was a benefit.